We talk ball here all year at the Voice of College Football, of course, but now we can legitimately talk some ball that's going to be actually on the field very soon. And we're all happy about that. Can't wait. Week zero's upon us. Oklahoma gets in action, of course, in just about 10 days. We got Jason Ray here for Oklahoma Sooners Live, edition number 125. Always appreciate Jason being here. Always appreciate. He's the guy that helped me launch this show 125 weeks ago and has kept it going strong with Sooner Tailgate Live that you can typically catch on Friday afternoon, usually 3 Central. But that's one of the reasons why you want to subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Sometimes with schedules that have to fluctuate, we need to move these shows based on work and personal schedules. So again, Jason's produced Tailgate Live there 8 consecutive weeks. So join Jason there, but glad to have Jason here this week for Sooners Live. Jason, how you doing?
Doing good, Mark. As you mentioned, we're very close. You know, we talk about this all the time. I think it's probably for me the most anticipated start to a sporting season, just because there's such a long lull between. It's the longest off season of any major sport that's out there. So I think it's always like, a little bit of a national holiday when the games start. And of course, we got a little bit of a primer this Saturday with week 0 before the entire country gets kicked off the following weekend.
Yeah, and the NFL is up to 17 games played and has a much more elaborate postseason. And so college football, it's the length of the offseason. Then it's also just 12 precious Saturdays during the regular season for each fan base. So the scarcity creates supply and demand and creates anticipation like no other sport. No doubt about that. Well, before we get to 2023, and we'll take your comments and questions, place them, please, in the live chat. Consider the Super Chat contribution. And, of course, please hit the like button. It's a simple thing to do that helps grow the channel. YouTube likes to see that. Andy Bass announcing on Thursday, David Stone announcing on Saturday. And as you let me know before we came on, David Stone, who plays at IMG, has a game on ESPN2 on Saturday. So it most likely will surround that game in terms of the announcement there. But David Stone seems to be, I don't want to say a lock, but I know Oklahoma fans are optimistic, and they should be.
Yeah, no, and they should be. Yeah, you're right, Mark. And this is a guy that Oklahoma has been heavily after for, not just this year, over the last couple of years. And he's a guy that has visited Oklahoma probably no less than about 15 times over the last couple of years. Obviously, most of those on his own. But yeah, he's a guy that Oklahoma really, really has to get. I know there's a little bit of a sour taste in most Oklahoma fans' mouth relating to the Nwaneri recruitment and then his eventual commitment to Missouri. But I think, and part of this is PTSD that Oklahoma people have, fans and media and just alike, that have related to Oklahoma's inability to really get any big-time 5-star interior defensive lineman. I didn't realize it had been this long, Mark, but I kind of went back and had some discussions. And the last 5-star interior defensive lineman that Oklahoma has got was 2009, DeMarcus McFarland in 2009. So it's been 14 years. And so, I think that is kind of a microcosm of where Oklahoma's defense has been. So in any event, it will be a huge deal one way or the other, right? If Oklahoma is able to secure David Stone, I think there's a little bit of a sense of security with the defensive staff, particularly Todd Bates, on their ability to pull in, big time defensive players, especially coming off the heels of what type of season that Oklahoma had a year ago. Now, if this is a situation where he ends up going to Miami or something like that and falls through the cracks, I think the considerable pressure on Oklahoma to do whatever they can to get some of these big time defensive linemen is going to continue to be a bit of a bugaboo for this team. And what do they do outside of obviously making a difference on the field in terms of how they play defense? What are they able to do in spite of that? So I think it's a big time commitment. I think a lot of folks thought that the Nwaneri commitment was really going to be icing on the cake, so to speak, if Oklahoma was able to secure him. But David Stone all along has been the guy that they have targeted and have looked at. And, I think it's hard to say that Oklahoma's a lock at this point with 17-year-old kids. You never really know what's going to happen. Especially late in the process here. Still got 4 or 5 days until that commitment goes forward. But Miami's a player, absolutely. They are a definite player in this recruitment. So Oklahoma just really has to hold them off. And I think they have the edge. They have the relationship and the fact that Oklahoma's really been, and he's an Oklahoma kid, and so I think that helps as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting few days leading up to that commitment on Saturday.
And before we get to Thursday's commitment announcement, with David Stone being an Oklahoma native, even though, as you outlined, he's playing at IMG Academy, as many do, I have heard that there is a trend that those IMG players don't necessarily get attached to the area, and they usually head back somewhere close to their native land, their hometown to play. So there's not necessarily a strong trend that Miami, Florida State are able to snatch up those players that transfer to IMG just because they are there playing football temporarily.
Yep.
So that's, again, I've not seen metrics on it. I've only heard talk in that direction that it's likely from that standpoint that he heads back to Oklahoma just because that's a trend. And the other part here is that you hate to lose anybody in state that is this prominent, because I got to think Oklahoma produces 1 5-star per season, maybe not even that per cycle. And to let a guy get away that's in state, this isn't Texas, this isn't Florida, California, where there are plenty of guys of this caliber in state. Not that Oklahoma's not just pulled in a top 5 recruiting class going elsewhere. They can certainly do that. They have the ability, but it seems to me as though it's a little bit more prominent and important because he is an in-state product.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think Oklahoma has really done a good job here over the last year and a half or so, a couple years with Venables and staff in tow. And he's really made that a priority, is to really recruit. And you've seen this through some of the 2024 kids that Oklahoma has got. Oklahoma's, and as you mentioned, kind of that really delves right into the Andy Bass discussion as well. But yeah, they've made it a priority, and I think previously the Riley regime, it really wasn't a priority, and I think to some extent Riley had really alienated himself between some of the Oklahoma high school football head coaches and the Oklahoma staff. And so, you've seen a lot of those kids had went elsewhere. And so that's really starting to change a little bit. And so you're absolutely right about that. I think the one thing that you continue to hear about David Stone and his commitment is I think the feeling inside is that he really wants to be Sooner. He really wants to be in Oklahoma. But I think he's got some, as you would expect with a lot of these 17, 18-year-old kids, he's got some influence within his family that really wants him at Miami. So I think, this isn't a Missouri situation in terms of somewhere a team like Miami is going to give him an astronomical NIL deal that Oklahoma can't compete with. I think that kind of the NIL situation's a little bit different, but Mark, if mom wants you to go to Miami, it's really, really hard to say, no, I'm going to Oklahoma. So I think that's going to be, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I'm sure, just like with Nuaneri, there will be a late minute pitch by both Oklahoma and Miami. Michigan State's in it to a certain degree. I don't think they're a real player in it, so I do think it's really between Oklahoma and Miami. The people, most of the national people and most of the local people still think Oklahoma is in the lead by a decent margin, but as we've seen, that could certainly change things. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what wins out, his desire, or if he's able to kind of convince some people in his personal corner that Oklahoma's the place for him.
Michigan State is kind of an odd factor in this situation. Do you know of any connection there, or they just happen to connect? He just happened to connect with Mel Tucker and the coaching staff there?
Yeah, I think there was no connection that I'm aware of, Mark. I think there was a connection there from a coaching staff perspective. He Dave Stone's actually come out and said that if it was, and this is maybe more of an indictment on right now where that Michigan State football program is, but he said he loves everything about the campus and everything surrounding East Lansing and the Michigan State program, but specifically in the program, in the direction that the defense is headed specifically, he feels a lot more comfortable with where Oklahoma and Miami are. So I think they're a hat on the table, so to speak.
Speaking of NIL, we just had a conversation with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, folks. So that interview is going to be released on the national channel Thursday at 6 Eastern. And the reason that's important is because he has proposed legislation along with Tommy Tuberville, Senator of Alabama, to put guidelines on NIL. And we vetted through the entire proposal, and it's worth a listen. So that's going to be on the national channel, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Joe Manchin, Senator, West Virginia, who has proposed NIL legislation. So we also have a commitment date announcement set up for one Andy Bass. Mm-hmm. And looking at his numbers, Jason, for this past football season, 28 touchdowns, 17 rushing touchdowns, those 28 through the air, plenty of yardage, 61% completion percentage. But here's a prospect out of Oklahoma City, now not highly ranked, but your thoughts about this pursuit?
Yeah, so DeMarco Murray is really the lead recruiter on this one, and I expect at the end of the day, this one will be pretty easily slam dunk for Oklahoma on Thursday. But I do think, when you look at his, he's listed as an athlete. He's not really listed as a quarterback per se when you kind of look at the player rating and things like that. So really, really good player. I've actually seen some video of him, not had the opportunity to see him play live, but I think he probably fits more in terms of probably more of a running back, wide receiver. Obviously have to put on a little weight, but not bad when you look at 5'11", 200 right now. So, but yeah, I think this will be Oklahoma, and then he'll probably move to a different position, probably more of a running back or potentially a wide receiver. But yeah, certainly think that Oklahoma's in really good shape for Andy.
All right, folks, appreciate you being here for Sooners Live here at the Voice of College Football. And again, please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live, because we need to float the schedule from time to time. You can typically join Jason on Fridays for Sooner Tailgate Live. And again, just keep up with the notifications for that. But it's typically Friday afternoon around 3 Central Time. And we also have an upcoming live stream with made connections with John Hoover of All Sooners Nation on SI. And we're going to get together Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. So that's going to be right here as well. Jason, with only 11 or 12 days, whatever the count is, until the opener against, I can't even remember, Arkansas State, correct? Yes, correct. Arkansas State, Butch Jones and company coming to Norman. Are there any position battles that are still being waged, or even if it's not for a starting job, any news that you've heard out of camp that has caused your thoughts to be any different about playing time or any particular player making a move?
Yeah, there's a couple. Certainly, I think when you look at the running back position, it's a bit of a crowded room. I think when you came into this season, particularly coming into fall camp, you thought this was really kind of a Gavin Sawchuk 1A, Javonte Barnes 1B type of situation where they would really kind of share the load. But there's been a guy that's not necessarily come out of nowhere, but he's been injury free this fall and had an excellent camp. And that's Marcus Major. He's kind of the forgotten guy. He's played a decent amount. I believe this is his 5th year in the student uniform. He's just really not had the opportunity to make as much of an impact as he would like because of his just injury problems that he's continued to have. But he's been injury free this fall, and like I said, he's had an excellent camp. I think from some sources, they believe that he might have won that job, which is a little surprising given where Oklahoma has. So I think that's kind of a position battle, which is a good problem to have. I think that Oklahoma has. They've got those three. I think those 3 guys that will carry, will shoulder a lot of the load from a running back perspective. So certainly, at the least, you're going to see Marcus Major get a lot of carries here early on in the season. So I think that's one. I think, the wide receiver position is another one that has continued to have just a lot of competition and different players like kind of stepping up. I think some of the things that you hear is there may not necessarily be a big time number one. There may not be necessarily a CeeDee Lamb there or a Marquise Brown or a Sterling Shepard or something like that. But I think they've got a lot of complementary pieces that they really like coming into this year. Gavin Freeman is a guy that played sparingly last year, showed some flashes, that has continued to be the person that everyone mentions. Andrell Anthony is another that is a continued person that is mentioned in terms of people that are kind of showing up in a big way. Jaden Gibson's had a little bit of maybe a slower start, but has come on as of late. So I think, there's still going to be a lot of competition there. You've got about 6 or 7 guys that I think will have an opportunity to play early on. And then certainly when they get the conference season, we'll see if that gets pared down a little bit. And then when you move over to the defensive side, I think the biggest competition that will continue to show itself is probably in the secondary. Now, I think the secondary has an opportunity, I should say, to be much improved from what they were a year ago. Having said that, I think you can certainly expect to see just some varying degree of just inconsistency with some new kids coming in. So I think Woody Washington coming back has got one of the corners spots taken. And then you've got another one that looks like Gentry Williams, who's the Oklahoma product, who's a sophomore this year, got a little bit more playing time towards the end of last year. I think he's probably the odds-on favorite to start opposite Woody Washington. But then you've got some other kids, Josiah Wagner, a true freshman coming in. Makari Vickers is a true freshman coming in. So I think you'll have some competition there early on in the season in some of these games where it looks like they might have an opportunity to play a few guys and see who works the best. I think that will be something to look at. And then also when you look at the safety position, Billy Bowman comes back. Had a really good season last year. Could potentially work himself into an all Big 12 type of season at one of the safety positions. But the other one was, a little bit up for grabs, so to speak. You've got true freshman Peyton Bowen, who is one of those kids, Mark, I think he's just going to be too good to keep off the field in some capacity. Not sure what that looks like early on in terms of, being a starter. But I think, mid-season, he's a guy that's going to get more and more snaps. But Reggie Pearson, the transfer from Texas Tech, really hard-hitting safety. I think he's in that conversation as well. So I think the thing that you can have heard continuously as a buzzword out of the Venables camp this fall is is really the competitive depth that they had, and they just frankly just didn't have a year ago at a lot of these positions, up and down both sides of the ball. So, I think early on that with the schedule being what it is, I think they will have a little bit of an opportunity to, to kind of play with that a little bit, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Game 2 with SMU, have a decent amount of respect for that offense, what they've been able to do. So that might be a decent test for the new and hopefully improved Oklahoma defense. But I think offensively they'll have some ability to, and I don't want to say coast, but be able to look at a few different players at the skill position perspective and just see which ones really kind of are able to do it in a game type atmosphere.
We've got a huge week planned here at the Voice of College Football OU to get you set up for game week next week. Again, here's a Sooners Live, number 125 with Jason. Then Jason typically gets together with all of you on Friday for Sooner Tailgate Live. So be looking out for those notifications, but typically Friday at 3 Central Time. Then we get together with John Hoover of All Sooners Nation SI. That's going to be Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. So plenty of Oklahoma live coverage with all of you this week as we move you into game week against Butch Jones, who's probably hanging on by a thread in terms of job security after 2-10 last year at Arkansas State, and a good game for Oklahoma to probably flex its muscles, you would hope. And, we will dive more into the matchup, of course, next week, Jason. You will, I will, whether together or separate next week. But this non-conference schedule, yes, you mentioned that SMU is a team where progress can be evaluated a little bit better and more accurately, but it's really a schedule where the coaching staff is going to have a lot of room to evaluate players, figure out what works, what doesn't work, what combinations in the secondary offensive line work, what doesn't work, all of that before really running into an opponent most likely that's going to push them for 4 quarters.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I would even extend that into the first 2 conference games. Oklahoma goes to Cincinnati and hosts Iowa State before Texas. So no, I think if we're in a situation when we're looking at this team after the first 5 games and they're anything but 5-0 heading into Texas, then I think there's cause for concern. Outside of a major injury, because you'd mentioned Arkansas State as well. You have to have a little bit of respect for Butch Jones and what he's been able to do. But again, not a great team a year ago. SMU, they were hit by the portal. They added some folks from the portal, but they'll be breaking in a new quarterback with Tanner Mordecai moving over to Wisconsin this year, and then Tulsa's in a little bit of a rebuild as well. And that'll be just a glorified home game for Oklahoma, even though it is in Tulsa with Kevin Wilson starting, his first year. So yeah, I mean, I think those first three games will give Oklahoma an opportunity, as I mentioned, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, to get ready, for conference season. It's a road test, so I think that's a good to start with against Cincinnati, but I think Cincinnati is going to be significantly down from what they've been in years past. They've got, I think they only returned 9 starters from a year ago. The roster was kind of gutted to a certain degree with the Fickle move over to from Cincinnati to Wisconsin, and you've got Emory Jones as probably their starter at this point, which doesn't put a lot of fear into most people's eyes. And then you host Iowa State before Red River, and who knows what kind of team they're going to have when this kicks off with their their situations. I don't think Deckers I don't think he's even practiced, from what I understand. And Jameer Brock, the first team running back last year, is no longer on the team. So yeah, I mean, I think, and this is, sort of as you talk about the Big 12, Mark, I think you could you could certainly see a situation where Oklahoma may not necessarily be roster-wise as talented as Texas, maybe not as talented as Kansas State, but the schedule sets up in such a way that it's going to allow them to have should allow them to have a solid year. I know you had this up on the screen a minute ago. If I think the dividing line for me is 9-3. I think anything below 9-3 with this schedule is cause for concern. So certainly 8-4 is a possibility, right? You've got some tricky road games towards the end of the schedule when you go to Oklahoma State. Obviously, the last Bedlam game that we will see, I wouldn't say ever, but for quite some time. And then you go to Kansas, which is arguably may have one of the best offenses in the league. I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do on the defensive side of the ball. And you go to BYU, which is kind of a trendy pick for an area where Oklahoma could fall. Then you've got TCU at home as well. So you've got the latter part of the year that's really kind of the schedule is backloaded to a certain degree. So, I mean, you could see a situation where they could lose 3 games, but if they lose any more than 3 with what you would hope as, you've got some increased, talent on the field with the recruiting classes over the last couple of years, with what Oklahoma's done on the transfer portal being very, very active, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. For that is, and I think Oklahoma doesn't have to be astronomically better than they were a year ago. If they're a little better, 0-5 in one score games. A year ago, 5 of the 7 losses outside of obviously the blowouts against TCU and Texas, Oklahoma had every opportunity to win those. So if they're just marginally better, and this team doesn't have to be a top 20 defense. If they're just an average defense, and you hear this time of the year with everything that Oklahoma has, it's a big ask to go from 122nd to top 20 in a year. Not many teams are able to make that jump, but if this team could be, I don't know, Mark, top 40, top 50 overall defensive team, I think that would be enough to, kind of flip the script on some of those one possession games where they're able to make that difference this year.
And that's a statistical ranking that means a lot. I don't want to discount in any way the statistical rankings at the end of the year. I think are 80 or 90% very indicative of how good you are on either side of the ball. However, this defense, if they can't improve significantly in those rankings with a non-conference schedule that gives them very little resistance and an in-conference schedule that gets them off to a great start, as you mentioned, not just from the standpoint of the probability of a win, but the probability that they're going to hold down Cincinnati and Iowa State that have what could project as anemic offenses. Iowa State certainly did last year. Now they lose their best running back and their quarterback because of the gambling scandal. If you can't do anything with that, TCU, you would have to expect they've lost a lot of playmakers on offense, best running backs, wide receivers, Max Duggan. So is there anything, Jason? Of course, we don't get a whole lot out of fall camp, so I'm not necessarily directing it that way, but more or less as we both go through our deep dives of these teams for the last, month to 6 weeks, with the magazines coming out and with us being able to really dig into these rosters. Do you think differently or have a different perception of this league, or who could be good, who could not be good differently today than you did a couple months ago?
I don't know that I feel any different about but who could be good. Obviously, Iowa State has gone down a little bit based on, for me, what's been going on with the with the gambling scandal, as you mentioned. I have a lot of respect for Matt Campbell as a head coach. Last year was the first year, I think, he's been in quite some time that they did not make a bowl game. So I think naturally you would have assumed that they would have had a little bit of a step ahead this year, but they may not be in that type of situation this year, given that. So, I mean, I think, Mark, the wild card is Texas. It always is. They have the most talented roster in the Big 12. They probably have top, I would say, if you just look at talent alone, they probably have top 5 to 10 talent in the country, right? I mean, they're not as talented as probably Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, but they're probably right there, with them, just a notch below. But can they put it all together? They're clearly the best roster in terms of talent in this league, but they have the same situation. I think they were 2-5 in one-score games a year ago. They lost 5 games last year, and all of them were by 1 score or less. So almost a similar situation to what OU had last year, just in terms of not being able to win a lot of those close games. Had Alabama on the ropes, and then certainly in some of these other games as well. Had Texas Tech down 14 in that game before they lost that game. So I think they are, if you see kind of a level of maturity, and Quinn Ewers is able to kind of take that step, that next step, I think they are a team that certainly is the best talent in the conference. Now, losing Bijan Robinson, how are they able to replace his contribution is going to be interesting. I think they're absolutely loaded at the wide receiver position. So if you get anything out of, and I'm not comparing this to Ohio State, but I'm kind of thinking in the same realm. Ohio State has the best wide receiver core in the country. To me, it's not really close, but whoever is the quarterback at Ohio State, are they able to take advantage of that same situation here on a smaller scale? Right, in terms of Texas, is Quinn Ewers the type of player that's going to be able to take advantage of a really good wide receiver group? I think so. That's one thing with them defensively. I think they were much better against the run last year, but they were in the 90th area against the pass. Is their secondary improved over what they were last year? I know they got Jalen Catalon comes over from Arkansas. That should maybe help that secondary a little bit. As well, but specifically when you look at some of the other teams, Kansas State is a team that has they've lost a little bit. Replacing Deuce Vaughn is not going to be easy, but they've lost a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. But I think they have either all 5 or 4 of their 5 offensive linemen returning. What you're going to get out of a Kansas State coach team, so I think they're there. I mean, I think when you look at the Big 12, and I see BYU mentioned here, I think when you look at the Big 12, it's probably the deepest conference, I would say, in the country, just in terms of 1 through 12, right? In terms of what they're able to do, you probably don't have, outside of Texas, I think at this point you don't have a team that has the talent to probably make some noise and go to the college football playoff. But again, at the same time, I think there's more competition that will be there day in and day out than maybe just outside of the SEC, right? But no, I mean, I think the long-winded answer to your question, I don't think there's a lot that's really changed my mind that I've heard through fall camp. I'm not quite sure what to make of TCU, as you mentioned. Very appropriately, they've lost a lot of talent, both at the running back and wide receiver position. I do kind of, if you're really kind of looking at TCU, and Chandler Morris did beat out Max Duggan for that job to start the year, so they saw something in him, obviously, that they thought would be that would make them really successful. Is he able to do that, this year? Kind of remains to be seen, but. I think TCU, with their schedule, has an opportunity to start 6 or 7-0 until they get into sort of kind of the meat of what that schedule looks like. So, I think it's one of those years, Mark, where you can there's no, even though Texas is the trendy pick to win the conference, and to some degree they're right there every year. I think it's open between Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas State and TCU and even Texas Tech to a certain degree. You return 11 of your starters on offense, and you've got something. But similar situation between them and Kansas for me. Like, what what do they have on the defensive side of the ball? Are they able to compete at a high level enough to compete for a conference championship?
Here are a few components that I believe could factor into a lot of volatility. And when I say that, I mean in a fun, intriguing way, volatility in this conference. One is that, keep in mind, folks, that 7 of the 10 teams in the Big 12 last year had at least a 3-game difference in their win-loss record from the year before. 70% of the league changed that much, a la Oklahoma from 10-2 to 6-6 in the regular season. That's a drastic difference. So 7 of the 10. So a lot changed between 2021 and 22, first off. Secondly, to Jason's point, I agree that the league is closer top to bottom than any league. Now, because of Cincinnati's entry and Iowa State having its off-field issues, there might be a lower basement than what we anticipated a couple months ago. But still, the top 11 or 12, I'm not going to say that they're razor close. There's definite distinction there, but it's much closer than the other conferences. The other conferences, you get past 2 or 3 and there's a drop off. Then you go through 5, 6, 7. Then there's another drop off. And the hierarchy is very distinguished. Here, it's Texas is the most talented, but nobody in that locker room has proven anything. None of them have won a big game. The coaches, the head coach and the coaching staff, they've not won a big game. So they haven't proven anything. And then because of that close proximity of ability, talent, and projection by everyone, one team could be on a run of, okay, they get a break on the schedule. They don't have to face X, Y, or Z. Plus, they're really having a good year when it comes to injuries. They get some lucky bounces and some breaks. And then on the flip side, some other team who could be just as good, lucky, unlucky bounces and breaks. Too many injuries, key injuries, lose last second field goal games, consecutive weeks. The difference between an 8-4 team at the end of the season in this league and a 5-7 team could be practically nothing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, you go no further than the last 2 years for Oklahoma to see that, right? 2 years ago, Oklahoma did a wonderful job in winning a lot of these one-score games. And, they ended up, I can't remember the record off the top of my head, only 2 losses in the regular season. I think 10-2 going into the bowl game. And then last year, they lost all 5 of these one-score games, to your point. And so this is why, and it's very trendy this time of the year. And you kind of mentioned with all the magazines and the just prediction era that we're in and the season that we're in, is that there's a lot of ceilings and a lot of floors. Now, this is why I struggle with floors, is because there's all of the situations that you mentioned so eloquently, Mark, is that you've got injuries to account for. You've got other situations certainly that could play an impact that you don't anticipate, which could honestly cause issues from a floor perspective. But I think when you look at it, there's Oklahoma gets the opportunity to avoid Texas Tech and Kansas State. I think that's 2 big breaks that they get, in this schedule. Whereas, Texas doesn't necessarily have the same break. Kansas State doesn't necessarily have the same break. Now, TCU has a little bit of a benefit of that schedule as well. So, I think it's one of those things you have to keep an eye on each and every week. Is you're exactly right. There could be a very, very small margin of error in a team going 5-7 and 9-3, so to speak. And so, I think that's certainly something that will be very intriguing to watch, week in and week out. And, with the newer teams coming into the conference, I'm very interested to see, how they're able to make that transition from, Group of 5 to Power 5. Right. I think inherently for me, and I think UCF probably is the best positioned in year one. BYU is probably the most used to the rigorous schedule that they would have. But what does that look like at the end of the year, right? The last in November, when some of these teams are taking a Big 12, a Power 5 beating each and every week, whether they have left in the tank late in the year, which will be interesting to watch. And so, I'm here for it. I think it'll be interesting. I like the fact that when you have a league where it's not where it's very competitive, up and down the schedule. I mean, as you mentioned, there's not a whole lot of other leagues that are like that. If you just think of the Big Ten, you've got Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State right there. Then maybe Wisconsin's a little bit of a step below, but those are your big time programs. Coming into 2023 at least. So, whereas the Big 12 has a little bit of more balance up and down the lineup. Now, like I said, I don't know that the Big 12 has a team as good as Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, right? But it's more not more fun, but I think it's more intriguing for Big 12 fans watching that week in and week out.
So you hit on the component that I forgot to add when I went through my little soliloquy there about why this could be so fun and everything. Was the obvious one, that you got 4 new teams. So credit the Big 12, and I know they fell into this. This wasn't by design that they played everyone for all those years, and the entire conference. There's only 10 teams, so you play everyone, and there's a 9-game schedule. But the good thing in that is the obvious, that not only does everyone play everyone, so you've got a true champion, but it also means that the standings are the most accurate and reflective of what actually happened in the league. And you don't have to be looking at the standings like you do in every other conference and think, okay, they missed them and them, and they had to play all the best teams and they missed the worst team. You don't have to play that game, or didn't in the Big 12 for all those years. It's just flat out. Now you could dissect it and say, well, they caught them at a good time and they caught them at a bad time. But basically everybody played everyone. So the standings couldn't be debated. Anyway, that's exactly what happened. Okay, now we've got the wild card of 4 new entries, which I don't think anyone expects any of them to be a serious contender at the top. They're going to be in the lower tier generally. I agree with you that UCF appears to be the most capable, and BYU next, one of those two or both of them. But they're going to play 9 conference games each, so that's 36 games. I'm going to guess that they're going to win, 13 or 14 and lose the rest of them. Whatever the number is, they're not going to go 500 in the league, the 4 of them. I would be surprised. So they're going to boost the records of the other teams in the league to a certain extent. So that's another wild card in this, or 4 new entries that aren't bad teams. They're capable of beating just about anybody in the league on a given Saturday, but they're not going to win most of the games. They're going to lose most of the games, probably 60 or 70% of them. So it's going to help. I got to think the Texas Techs of the world maybe boost their conference record a little bit. And that's one team right there that I just mentioned that I know a lot of people are high on as being a dark horse wild card to get to the conference championship game. And they've got an intriguing game in week 2 with Oregon coming to town. I'm all about that game. I think that's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, there's some big time games in week 2 for the Big 12. The biggest one obviously is Alabama and Texas, but yeah, there's a lot of marquee matchups outside of the conference and the non-conference for the Big 12 in week 2. But yeah, I think to your point, Mark, about the 4 new ones, I think that's fair. When you kind of look at 13 to 14 wins between the 4. So I think, as we mentioned, I agree with you. UCF and BYU seem to be very well positioned, at least early on, to be somewhat competitive. I mean, I think UCF has an opportunity to finish in the top half of the league, and I think the other three are probably a little bit lower, where specifically Houston and Cincinnati, I think they're both kind of in the lower level of the league in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, I think Texas Tech is it's probably one of the most interesting teams in the league. Historically, Texas Tech has always been kind of the same team, right? Even Mike Leach and beyond is a team that is able to put up points, but are they able to get enough stops when they need to, for that? And certainly they had a much better season last year than I think a lot of people anticipated, right? But can they do that this year? And so, yeah, I think you find out a lot about them in week 2 when they face Oregon, and I think Oregon is starting to be a team that's a little bit of a trendy pick in the Pac-12 this year. I mean, I think no one really wants to. I mean, nationally, I'm not saying this particular fan base, but no one wants to really, I think, go out on a limb to say that USC is going to be good enough defensively to win, to win a Pac-12 championship this year. And so now I think they're right there. They've got to be in the conversation. But yeah, I think that'll be like I said, for Texas Tech, I think that'll be a big indication early on what type of team that they are able to have, and certainly they'll be able to score with everyone that they're playing. But can they get enough stops?
Jason Ray's here on our show each and every week, whether that be here on the Sooners live show or on his Sooner Tailgate live show that's typically Friday afternoon, right around 3 Central Time. Keep those notifications coming so you know when Jason goes live, when we go live here on Sooners Live. And then we're getting together with John Hoover of All Sooners Nation. That's coming up on Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. So 3 big live hits this week out of us here at OU with the voice of college football. And before we say goodbye to everyone, there was a comment in the chat about Danny Stutsman and the linebackers. And here's a player that I don't want to criticize him because he's a fine player. If you just look at a stat sheet, he looks like a near star player. But I know in having conversations with you and then hearing from others that we've had on that there is some room for improvement for him to tighten up his game and bring along that linebacking room with him.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think he's had, from all indications, Mark, he's had just a phenomenal offseason, spring and fall camp. I think he is the clear-cut leader of that defensive room. I think one of the things Brent Venables mentioned in his, I believe it was at Big 12 Media Days, that when he brought Danny Stutsman there, he was like, a year ago, right now, a year ago, there's no way that he could help lead a practice, lead a group, have, kind of during the off season, lead that team and having some practices and stuff like that. And he's a guy that not only can do it, but feels very comfortable in doing it today. So, I think that linebacker room will be better. And again, I'm going to say the same buzzword. There's competitive balance there. Venables was very honest in this in terms of what was there what he said from last year was he only had really about 3 to 4 guys that he trusted that would be able to play in games last year, and that was including Koenig, that played in a reserve role at times. And so I think the fact that you've got about probably 5 or 6 guys that they feel really comfortable with now that they could put out there. I think that helps, right? When you have kids, and this was not necessarily unique to the linebacker position, Mark, but you had guys throughout the roster that didn't have that same competitive balance, so competitive depth, I should say. So a lot of guys were playing more snaps than they should have, and that's a lot of the reason why they got run down late in games and certainly late in the season. But no, I think this linebacker group has the opportunity to be a lot better. I think right now, obviously, you've got Stutsman and Koenig as your two starters, and then kind of depending on what defense that Oklahoma's in. They'll have a third. I think you're going to see Kobe McKenzie come in and play some. Kip Lewis will come in and play some. He's a little bit light in terms of what they would, where they would like him, but I think he's there and he'll get to play. And so you've got some additional kids that may have an opportunity to play as well in terms of just looking at what that depth looks like. So yeah, I think you see a big jump from a leadership perspective, and I think the thing that you would look for from an improvement perspective, as you mentioned, when you just look at his stats, they are really, really good. But I think the one thing that he struggled and got lost a little bit in times was in pass coverage a year ago. At times, overran some plays, and wasn't able to kind of make that one-on-one tackle. And you can chalk some of that up to fatigue, and chalk some of that up to maybe a little bit of inexperience, but I think he's, from all indications, he's a lot better and a lot more comfortable, in dropping in pass coverage, and certainly the one-on-one tackles will remain to be seen exactly how much improvement you see out of there as well.
Here's the rundown, folks. Our next show here at the Voice of College Football is over on the Iowa channel. It's at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. Our Hawkeyes live show coming up at that time on Tuesday. Again, I'm getting together with John Hoover Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. You can catch that right here on the OU show live. Jason should be getting together with everyone on Friday for Sooner Tailgate Live. Just keep those notifications open, and you will get the notifications on when we are live. But we've got 2 more planned this week. Appreciate everybody being here. Anything else, Jason?
No, I don't think so. I think really exciting time of the year. We're all excited to get it through the talking season and get to the playing season. So,
all right, folks, appreciate you being here, and catch us all those times this week, Thursday and Friday, right here at the Voice of College Football OU.